Good late evening, everyone, and the last evening of the last rest day. And a productive rest day it has been. We have had a leak. We've built, or I've built Apple his new indoor home, and we've moved the breakfast bar. Oh, look, it's covered in tanks again. Oh dear, oh dear. Anyway, back to the subject of today. So, once upon a time, the most hated tank in Britain was the Tiger 1 tank, mainly hated due to its adverse effects on pretty much any British tank unit that met it. However, now the title of the most hated tank in Britain is probably owned by the Russian or Soviet origined, now Russian T-90 tank. Now, again, just in the way that people do build Panzers and Panthers and Tigers. And do you know what? Why not? They're building tanks. I've built the T-90. I haven't done it as Russian because that'd be against the rules. But I have built the T-90. And again, how you use tanks, whether that's Western or Russian or Chinese or Eritrean or Iraqi or Libyan, how you use a weapon doesn't necessarily mean that the weapon system itself is purely evil. It's all about use and who is using them. So for many years, the T-90 was just pottering around Russia and India, causing not really much concern. Then the war in Ukraine started, and of course everyone switched to their keyboard warrior setting and loves to see these things being blown up, forgetting that there's someone's son, someone's brother inside the tank, which is why I don't glorify violence. But anyway, back to the tanks. Here we have the excellent Zvezda T-90, which is a proper static model. And here we have the £4 Viikondo 4D puzzle T-90. Now, the Malagasys have been warned to stop dancing the polka with the Russians, but they decided to have one last tango in the night via India. And here we see the results of the Malagasy upgrade of the T-90M. This is actually an MS, but the difference is really most visible in the larger machine gun. Now, the Zvezda one is far more detailed. Zvezda probably have access to the real deal when they were planning the model, but the Viikondo one is not bad at all. Certainly not bad when you factor in that this cost £4 and this one is currently retailing now, I think due to sanctions, because it was never that expensive before, at £24.99. So what have I done to this one, and what have the Malagasy military industrial complex done to it? Well, firstly, they've weathered it, which is quite rare for these new tanks, but eventually all of them will be weathered, as I want to try out some different weathering techniques. Secondly, they've gone down the normal route, but this tank is a lot lighter than its Western equivalent, and they can't really push the weight too much because it would overstrain the power pack. Now, already the T-90M Pirov, coming in at 48 tonnes, is putting a great deal of strain and stress onto the chassis and drivetrain. So this is very much a budget modification, which may interest India. And that's hence why the collaboration is with India on this tank. So we have a deficiency on the T-90, which is on the side area here, and that is against tandem charge anti-tank missiles or against big anti-tank missiles such as the Stugnut P. Now, the only real way of dealing with those is double era blocks. Even then, it's not guaranteed. Now, the T-90 does apparently have a spool liner, but what I've done here is I've put on the outer era, which is in this block form, a bit like the Realect or contact armour, and then underneath you would have era underneath as well, but that's more vertical angle. This one is at a angled, sloped angle, and the idea with that is that that deforms the liner and stops the heat warhead from forming properly. The same thing is exhibited on the roof here for top attack weapons. Extra reactive armour applied here on top of the front of the vehicle. Again, we've got that reflected on this side as well. And then a vertical, that would be just a composite armour plate underneath in blocks at the bottom, just to give it some extra protection. It does still have the statistical protection of the Q-net, which is the same as what's on the Pirov M, and that's just Amazon fly net, mosquito net. Now, I really like how this tank has come out. Now, with the weight limit on this, this is pushing, and I tried to work out the weight of all the tiles, kind of what it would be in practice, and I came up with about 52 to 53 tons. So we're already pushing over the weight there. Now the Pirov itself in the later models are pushing about 50 tons in combat readiness. 48 is kind of at the lightest point, but maybe it's not that much, maybe 51 tons. So it's just above the 50 ton mark. Anyway, that's what you need to know. And the problem with that is that you can't really go and adding active protection, jamming systems, etc. on. You kind of have to choose. Now, the remote weapon station is in a really annoying place. I don't like it when they put it behind the crew compartments, because it makes adding the cages really difficult. As you can imagine, you still need to allow that to move. Now, in Ukraine, you've seen a lot of T-90s where they've just ditched the remote machine gun and just covered the thing in homemade armour. Well, the Malagasys wanted to do it a bit more professionally, and as you can see, the paint is still actually drying on this model, but they have gone for this sort of cut down cope cage model without the statistical protection against the early RPGs and pooping drones on the side. It will protect against pooping drones. It won't protect against FPV, EFP drones coming in like this. It may give some protection against top attack because of the angles of the reactive armour tiles, and these are reactive armour tiles on a base. That's the way I'm doing these top attack cages now. But the most important thing on here is the jamming system. So we've got two large jammers here, replicating the ones which are now fitted to the T-90s by the Russians. And then we've got, this is your digital sort of radio here. So the idea of these jamming systems is that they are able to disrupt an incoming drone or incoming ATGM to a degree. Probably wouldn't be effective against things like the Javelin and the NLAWs in top attack mode. But the idea of stopping like the pooping drones or the FPV drones, just totally disrupting them, throwing them off, even if it pushes them just to a miss or pushes them away from the tank's centre of mass. That's really what I'm going for there, to keep within the weight considerations. So can the Russians build bigger tanks? Well, yes, they can. Here's the Armata. So why is the T-90 this size and why is the T-90 this weight? Effectively, the T-90 is a light tank by NATO standards, even though it is the Russian or Soviet originally kind of end of the USSR, the change, you know, we've got Boris Yeltsin, we've got Russian tank units firing shells into parliament, all of that going on. No money, basically. Then you've got a series of massive military setbacks like the Chechen wars, 1994, resolved in 1999 to 2000. And then you've got the Kursk sinking. Alexa, turn off. So you've got a lot going on in that period. And you may ask, well, why have they stuck with this? Well, there's a few reasons. And the first reason is the Russians rely on railway transport due to the size of Russia, poor road infrastructure and the vast distances to be covered. The wagons will have a loading gauge and a weight restriction. If you look at the pictures of T-90s on the way, they're either loaded singly or they're in part of massive, huge tank columns, and weight and shipment is clearly important to the Russians. So therefore they haven't gone for supersizing everything yet, and they haven't gone for massive weight increases as per the NATO tanks. The next reason is because of the factories. So if you look at the Soviet tanks, T-72s, T-64s, T-80s, they all get gradually bigger, but they're not massively bigger at each incarnation. And you can see that with the T-90M Pirov, it's the same rough size as a T-72. So it's obvious that rather than retool the entire factories and redo everything, everything is an evolution in Soviet and then Russian military technology. So if you flip up a Pirov, you'll find it looks suspiciously like a T-72 underneath. And the Viikondo is not short of a whole detail there, which actually comes out quite well when you wash it. And you know, they're evolving. The Armata is a completely separate platform, but the Armata will need new tooling, it will need new factory lines. That incurs extra costs. So what the Russians have said is that they know that they can build a tank with better crew protection. However, due to the limitations of retooling all the factories, and they want to produce masses of the tanks, they've stuck with these platforms. The next thing of note on the T-90 is the autoloader. And this has been confirmed by viewing a video of the Russians changing a T-90 Pirov turret in Ukraine. So they had a T-90 which had hit a mine, and then they had a T-90 which had been hit by an ATGM or a drone which had blown off the back end of the turret. So they had a nice turret from one T-90 and they had a nice hull from the other T-90. And in the field in Ukraine, they've swapped the turrets. Normally a factory job, they've done it in the field, which shows the robustness of the technology. But what that allows to see, and what I think they didn't censor, is that actually the T-90 has a similar autoloader to the T-72. It has spare ammunition in the rear, which is under these bustle panels, but it has an autoloader, and the autoloader has a plate, an armoured plate on the top. So you could say, well, why haven't they armoured the sides? Why haven't they protected the belly? And again, you've got that weight consideration that they can't because of the weight, but two, they're really at the edge of the chassis. And that's why the tanks, and there is another video of one being hit in the side, probably by a Stugner P, and literally it just evaporates. RIP to the crew. But you can't physically keep armouring that, and the armour that you'd have to put on the side of the autoloader to stop the damage from tandem charge, warheads and IEDs and EFP penetrators would be prohibitive within that size of the chassis. So I think what's happened is the Russians have said, okay, well, we're going to lose some people. What's the acceptable rate for losses from a population of 144 million? And I think, and I might be wrong, I don't know, I've not got a direct line to Putin. I think what he's done is said, okay, well, we can have this much losses per month and sustain the war effort, and that's what they're working to. And with 144 million population compared to Ukraine's 30 million ish population, they are fighting a war of attrition. So if they say, well, we can have 10 T-90s, let's do that. Let's put in an armoured plate on the top of the autoloader, but we know it's vulnerable to the sides. And really, even with the Realict and the Contact 5 and the Contact 1 external reactive armour, the tank, like all tanks, remains vulnerable. Your front 30 degrees and your frontal arc is the strongest place. And if you look at the T-90, there's no exception. Penetrating the front of a T-90 with a modern weapon system would not be easy. The side is weak and the rear is very weak. Now, the Russians have fitted statistical protection in the form of the bar armour, like the Challenger 2 TES on here, which deals with your earlier RPGs. The Malagasys have gone to rectify the deficiency on the sides, and that's where you've got this new reactive armour tile system, angled tandem double layer reactive armour like the Tusk, and that is designed to stop your ATGM threat. Now it won't have much impact against armour piercing, discarding, fin stabilised discarding sabot rounds. So if one of these met a Leopard 2A7 and didn't get off the shot first, or was vulnerable to it, it would be penetrated from the side, probably be penetrated from the front. And that is something where, again, you're taking a risk, but the likelihood of that happening is a lot smaller. The likelihood of you facing a Stugner P team dug in is a lot higher, and that's where the remote weapons system comes in, so you can put down some suppressive fire. And tactics is also something which has to be taken into account, and that's where the Russians didn't get it right initially. So what I've done within the weight limitation, just bringing it in just above 50 tons, I can't fit a belly plate. I haven't got the weight to do that. It would lose its mobility. So what I've done is upgrade it within the weight limitations that I'm aiming for, and I've upgraded it to face the main threats that I think it will face. And to be honest, I really like the result. I think the T-90 to me is a really nice tank to begin with, within the design constraints and considerations, and I really like how this one's come out. Let me know what you think. I'm going to go and get some rest, and then I'll see you all in a few days. Take care. Goodbye.